You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 193. Last week, we did a classic podcast rebroadcast with the episode from Dr. Keith Williams, which is one of my all-time favorites, all about feeding issues. And Dr. Williams was such a wealth of information. But that podcast was originally recorded, I think, back in 2019, maybe now, probably 2020. So it's older, and there's a lot of learnings that we have done. So Kelsey, our community manager, is back for the top 5 questions regarding feeding and eating issues with kids on the autism spectrum or little kids who are extremely picky or have some kind of feeding issue, or they are, still on a bottle, addicted to a pacifier. There's drinking issues, there's feeding issues, there's all kinds of questions, how to use utensils. In this episode, we are starting right now, top 5 questions. Let's get to it. All right, Kelsey, we are back. Thanks for joining me today. It's early morning for you and pretty early for me as well. Kelsey's in British Columbia, Canada, and I'm in Pennsylvania. So we are 3 hours apart. And so today we are talking all about the top 5 questions we get about feeding.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it because we get a lot of questions about feeding. It's a really tricky topic and really stressful for families. It is really stressful. So let's get into it. The first question is, my child is a very picky eater, but doesn't eat any new foods and won't let me feed them. What can I do?
Yeah. So for those of you out there listening, I'm assuming many of you have the book Turn Autism Around, an action guide for parents of young children with early signs of autism. Even though the subtitle is for young children with early signs of autism, this book is really great for any parent or professional working with any child who is still struggling with talking, tantrums, eating, sleeping, potty training. And there's a whole lot in this book, including chapter 10, which is Solve Picky Eating. And in preparation for this podcast interview, both Kelsey and I reviewed chapter 10, and we both were just commenting that there is a lot in chapter 10. It's actually probably one of the most useful chapters of this whole book. So if you have the book, chapter 10 is a great thing to read. And also last week we republished, as part of our classic broadcast series, we rebroadcast the podcast interview with Dr. Keith Williams, which is so helpful, right? I mean, that is hands down one of our top 5 of all time podcast interviews. I got to interview him because I sent him chapter 10 of my book in draft form, and he really helped me by providing some additional resources and references and all that stuff. So where to start? Well, we always have to start with step 1 of the Turn Autism Around approach, which is assessment. You have to assess where your child or client is at in terms of eating and drinking. And also, we need to make sure that this isn't something very serious. And, disclaimer in my book, in my podcast, everywhere you turn in my information, there's disclaimers that everything you hear from me is informational purposes only. And with feeding, when we have malnourishment, we've got, severe eating disorders, we have mineral and vitamin deficiencies, we have swallowing, chewing, gagging, vomiting, all kinds of things that could be very serious. So when in doubt, seek medical evaluations and use the things you're learning today, just to help you move forward. And I think we're going to give out great information today, but so assess, is your child growing? where are they on the weight curve, the height curve, and also just assessing. I know when I took Lucas to a feeding program, for instance, when he was 4, they had me in preparation, just take a journal and journal out every single thing he ate for 3 days straight. So whether that was the outsides of chicken nuggets, 4 chicken nuggets, and just ate the outsides of them. That's what he used to eat. Whether he drank, 2% milk, 4 ounces. And that's a really, I think, a great assessment tool, is just in general, do a 3-day diary journal of what your child is eating. Another assessment tool is Mark Sundberg's self-care checklist. And he gave me permission in my book to include the important parts of the self-care checklist for this age. And so by about 18 months of age, your child should be eating finger foods, drinking from a cup by themselves, using a spoon to scoop, and sucking from a straw. And for those of you that have kids in daycare settings, drinking out of an open cup is kind of a marker to move to a next class. It's a big deal. But when you have kids at home, like for me, I didn't know. I had Lucas drinking out of, the spill-proof sippy cups with the valve in them, which are particularly a bad idea for our kids because it's like sucking out of a bottle. It's very not natural. But if kids don't progress with eating, clearing the spoon and sucking from a straw and having the coordination and the lip muscles and mouth muscles to not spill as you're drinking from an open cup, those are all important developmental milestones that if you just are using spill-proof sippy cups with valves, they could be missing, and it could be affecting their talking, not just their eating as well. And then another assessment that we created, and I created based on Kelsey's son, Brentley, way back years ago when we were creating the toddler course. Kelsey was, at the time, my very best success story. Not that you're still not the best, Kelsey, because you are, but, she was, that's when she started working for me when we were creating the toddler course. And she was still having lots of trouble with Brentley and his eating. And she was sending me videos. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We got crying at the table. We've got refusal. We've got threats and bribes. And, Kelsey's an amazing mom. And I mean, just like we had Rachel on the show, and I mean, she's an amazing mom too, but we're still, as amazing moms, we're making all kinds of errors, especially if we don't know how to get a picky eater to eat. So we have the easy, medium, and difficult list that we created. And we could talk more about that with interventions, but that's on page 155 of the book. And in the first column are all the easy foods where your child will eat them, anytime, day or night. And a lot of times with our kids, a lot of times those are junk foods. And then the medium list is they'll eat them, but maybe brand specific. It has to be a, certain day, not always in the mood. And then the third list are the difficult foods. And that's foods you want your child to eat and they just outright refuse. But before we move on, and you can chime in here too, but I also wanted to say that in my book, and Dr. Keith Williams shared this, and I'm thinking he shared it on last week's podcast, but maybe some of you missed it, is that in my book, there is a study done, a pretty recent study, 2019, Susan Mays and Hannah Zickgraf published a study that suggests atypical eating, including severely limited food preferences and refusal of different textured foods, occurs in 70% of children with autism, which is 15 times more common than in typically developing kids. And and that extreme picky eating and other feeding issues can be a diagnostic indicator for autism, as kids on the spectrum are far pickier. So, I know we have a lot of parents and professionals in our toddler preschooler course with kids that aren't diagnosed with autism yet. And if they are very picky, that is one more sign of that, autism can and should maybe be diagnosed. So anything to add there with finding your starting point? I know that was a ton of information.
No, I don't think so. I mean, just to make sure before you get started with anything, you also keep your expectations in check, I guess would be a way to say it. We're not expecting kids to go from eating only Doritos to eating broccoli tomorrow. We have to really take small steps. This is the long game. And if you need to get like nutrition into your child, you should really talk to your doctor about ways to do that while you're slowly supporting their feeding, because you can't just jump into the foods on that hard list. So make sure you talk to your doctor and continue to consult with those people to make sure their nutrition is right. Because also if kids, nutrition isn't right, that can cause picky eating. Iron deficiencies, certain deficiencies can cause your taste in your mouth to be different. And so we do want to make sure we're doing all of our testing.
And you might need like supplements, like zinc supplements, for instance. We've talked about that on the show with Missy Olive. And you said in the sleep podcast, which I was kind of new information for me, is that your younger son, Lincoln, had an iron deficiency, which you believe was causing sleep terror.
Night terrors.
Night terrors. Night terrors. And so like all of these things, we can't just jump into assessing a 3-day journal without also assessing using my 1-page assessment, which is now going to be software very, very soon. But we need to assess the whole child, not just the feeding part. We need to assess the talking part. We need to assess safety. We need to assess self-care skills and all kinds of things, because especially with feeding, it's so interconnected with everything else.
Yeah. So that would be my only add to that. And so let's get on to our next question. But it says, where do I start to help with picky eating once my assessment's done? Are there feeding therapists? My child won't even sit at the table.
Yes. So as I said, Lucas did go to a feeding clinic as part of a children's hospital in Philadelphia. Dr. Keith Williams is at the Hershey feeding clinic, both, an hour away from my home. But there are feeding clinics, especially if you have a child who's failure to thrive, malnourished, having chewing, swallowing difficulties, those sorts of things, you have to seek medical help. So I went to Dr. Keith Williams with a handful or two of my clients. And because of my nursing background and my background as a behavior analyst, and going to the feeding clinic for 10 days with Lucas, and then going 10 or 20 visits with Dr. Keith Williams and studying more, I became more of an expert in feeding problems, especially with general picky eating and things like that. So I do think that there are steps that we can definitely take, especially if it's not a severe issue yet. So the earlier you can start any of this, the better. One of the biggest things is to get your child sitting to eat. No one does well when they can just graze all day on the easy foods, the junk foods. They can walk around with Doritos or even a bowl of cereal. I remember one of my clients, he would be with the grandmother, and we're working on feeding, and I show up and he has a bowl of Lucky Charms that he's walking around with. And it was his second bowl. Well, if I try to sit him at the table to eat something nutrition after 2 bowls of Lucky Charms where he can just graze around all day, I'm not going to have much success. So limit or totally eliminate any foods where the child's not sitting at a table. If they are under 2, a high chair is fine. But over 2, I've also seen, 3-year-olds in high chairs buckled in and strapped in. And, that's too old to be, unless they have some physical, issue where that's the only safe place for them. But trapping kids to eat or trapping kids for table time is not on our list of things to do. So we want kids to be running to the learning table. We also want them to be running to the kitchen table or the dining room table to eat meals and eat snacks. If you're going to serve snacks, then that has to be seated, with your snack. And because all this grazing is just really hurting things. The other things you can do, like I said, you might need supplementation. Sometimes kids that drink smoothies or milkshakes, you can put, supplements in there that are recommended by the physician or nutritionist. You can put vegetables and fruits in there. So that's not a bad idea either. And then, the other big thing is kids with autism or are going to get diagnosed with autism eventually tend to be very hooked on the way things look. So like if they see fries coming out of the drive-through McDonald's in the red container, that's what they want. They want fries in the red container. So you make fries at home, they don't want them. So if a child's hooked on baby food, for instance, I would recommend dumping out the jars of baby food into like styrofoam cups or non-see-through bowls, and not getting into, they have to see the package. They have to, because they're picky enough in terms of texture. And then you add the site and you add the brand specificity. I think you're going to do better just trying to remove the foods from the container. So those are some tips. I mean, there's many more strategies. We never want the child to be crying when they're eating, because talk about choking hazard, like that's not good, right? So we want the child to be calm. So initially I would just, cut out the grazing if at all possible. And that includes drinks of any calories like milk and juice and those sorts of things. So water away from the table is fine. It'll also keep things not messy. And then at the table, you want to really be giving them easy foods to begin with. So they could come to the table and they could have their Lucky Charms in a bowl. Like Kelsey's point about, we are not going to go from Doritos to broccoli. So you might have to, in the beginning, serve them a bowl of Lucky Charms the way they like it, dry without milk or whatever, with their fingers, whatever is easy for them. So take their easy list and just serve it at a table. If they need to eat 6 or 8 times a day, okay, time for another snack. We can sit at the table and we can eat. And if you're at the table also, it'll be easier to work on drinking from an open cup or a straw where, you can work on things instead of having the child just run around the room.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are good places to start. And I like what you said on pick one thing, like the grazing, and focus on that and getting seated at the table, because that's a good place to start. The other thing is a lot of people want to jump into, we're going to answer this question, yes, later on, well, I want my child to feed themselves. But in the beginning stages of getting them to feed, if your child's only eating on their own with handfuls of Lucky Charms at the table. Your next step might be getting them to eat the Lucky Charms off your spoon as you feed them, because that's going to be the easiest way to move forward with foods. And also, after you do grazing and you want to get started on, what food should I introduce first? You want to look at your easy, medium, hard list and go, okay, my child will eat applesauce, turkey, and mac and cheese. So maybe those are their 3 easy foods. Well, then instead of applesauce, you might give, strawberry applesauce or something mixed with it. You might give, instead of Kraft Dinner mac and cheese, you might try Annie's mac and cheese, or you might try something similar as kind of a first step. And again, like Mary said, always keeping them in those non-see-through bowls. But yeah, those are kind of the places to start.
And in the food list, in the sample one, that's actually Brentley's sample one from when we started. Because literally I created it. I was like, whoa, he's crying. This does not look good. And I didn't have this list. I was just like, you know what? Take a piece of loose leaf, write down everything easy, he'll eat, everything meat. And we created this, based on Brentley's experience. But, in the easy column, we have some kind of mac and cheese yellow. And in the medium column, we have mac and cheese white. So there is an example where once you get a couple good days under your belt with no grazing and just seated at the table eating easy foods, now your child's more hungry for the meals. And now you can, and you've already, kind of started dumping out. So they're not seeing the packaging as much. So, I mean, and these techniques can work for any picky eater. Like, even if you yourself listening are picky, really try to demand fade in. And I mean, this is all like shaping and demand fading and all the technical terms that we're not using, but these techniques will really work.
Yeah. And they do, because even if your child only eats one food and they scream and cry when even something else is put on the table, well, then you're not going to start with trying to feed them something else. You might start with just them accepting another bowl on the table that's not their bowl of Lucky Charms.
Yeah. And the other thing we should mention is, I had a client who drank, when I started with him, he was 2, he drank almond milk out of a bottle and he ate gluten-free crackers morning, noon, and night. And the only thing else he would eat is if they drove through McDonald's and got those stupid fries in the red container and they were hot and it was a full moon. And it's like, we had to, he got intervention with Dr. Keith Williams, and then we were able to really, get him eating. But the biggest thing, if you do go to a feeding clinic, or if you have a pretty extreme picky eater and these just basic little tips don't work, is you need more reinforcement while the child's eating. Even maybe eating the easy foods, or when you're going to slip in the medium foods, you're not probably going to just be able to slip in medium or difficult foods. You're going to probably have to have reinforcement. That may involve, just pairing. First, we're going to have, something good. Then we're going to sandwich in something medium. Then we're going to sandwich in something easy. So it's going to involve, and it might involve the child watching some electronic while they're eating really difficult foods. And I know there's all kinds of controversy on, screen time and those sorts of things. And it's like, for, interventions that are so important and skills that are so difficult, we may need additional reinforcement. And it could involve, like, for the little boy that drank from a bottle and ate, gluten-free crackers, he loved letters. He was hyperlexic. We've done a video, blog and podcast on that. We can link that in the show notes. We used an ABC puzzle. He took a bite of something he didn't like, and we had him, put in a puzzle piece or 3 puzzle pieces. I mean, or we put them in. I don't even remember exactly what the deal was, but we didn't use electronics. We used puzzle pieces. You got to use what the child likes. And so, in my courses and throughout my book, I talk about how to figure all that out. But don't forget reinforcement, because whenever you want to increase the behavior, you are going to have an arsenal of reinforcement.
Yeah. So that's how you start. So let's get on to the next question, which brings us to really popular one. My child will only drink milk out of a bottle. What can I do? They won't drink out of an open cup, straw cup, etc.
Yeah. So on page 157 in the same chapter, we talk about drinking interventions. And it's very common for kids whose parents or professionals are in our course, our toddler preschooler course, to not be able to do those 18-month skills. So whether they're 22 months, whether they're 3 or even 4 years of age, it's not uncommon for kids on the spectrum or going to get a diagnosis on the spectrum to be taking a pacifier still, whatever age. And that is really only advised up until age 1. So many of our kids are somewhat addicted to pacifiers and also bottles. So we are going to, when we assess, part of the assessment is the self-care checklist, right? Seeing what they can do. And also as part of my assessment, my Turn Autism Around assessment, I think it's the only assessment where it's like everything's included, including pacifier use, because I have seen it with hundreds of kids who I go in who are not talking or not talking well, who are older than 1 for sure, sometimes older than 3 or 4, and that are still using a pacifier. And pacifiers are bad for a number of reasons, as are bottles. Bottles also should be faded out after the age or around the age of 1. So we have to start with assessment of the drinking and the pacifier use as well, drinking from a bottle. And as I said in the previous question, the spill-proof sippy cups were at the valve, not good either. So you can also be looking at that when you do an assessment. So now you've got your child's using a pacifier in a bottle. So now what? Let me say, before I talk about pacifiers, that they're not good for feeding, but they have an unnatural suck. So when kids get older, they're not supposed to suck anymore. They're supposed to drink from a straw, which is a different mechanism where your tongue goes to a different place, your lips go to a different place, your mouth, the way you drink from a straw goes to, it's a whole different mechanism. And that's what also helps with talking. So talking, drinking, drooling. I've had kids who drooled that needed intervention. Like, it all is related. So assessment is first for drinking. And then on pages 159 and 160 and 161, we talk about weaning from a bottle and pacifier. Just like we can't go from Doritos to broccoli, we can't go from almond milk out of a bottle 24/7 to water out of a straw cup. Like and if you are having trouble, you may need some additional help to help you. But there are steps to weaning. You could say, okay, no grazing with the bottles. We're gonna get it down from 24/7 bottles to 4 times a day bottles. We could have a bottle in the morning, a bottle before nap, a bottle at dinner. You could have them drinking a bottle at the kitchen table with their meal. Like maybe some of the things they like about the bottle aren't even the bottle and the milk. Maybe it's just a comfort thing and free access thing. And just pare it down to where you can wean gradually. Same thing with pacifiers. You could limit it to only at church, only in the car, only at night, only for naps at night. And that's one of the ways we start to wean, is figuring out when the child needs the bottle or, excuse me. We have to figure out when the child needs a bottle or pacifier and when you need the bottle or pacifier to keep your sanity. And then slowly teach a child how to drink out of a straw, an open cup. And they do have spill-proof straw cups, which are fine. We have an episode with Melanie Potok all about, I think she's got some great resources. We can link to her show in the show notes, but she's got some great resources. She's an SLP on bottles, pacifiers, weaning, which cups are best. I think she's really a great expert at that.
Yeah, I think that's good. The other thing I will say, if your child can drink out of a straw cup, but they just will only drink milk out of a bottle, I talked to your doctor about, do they need the milk nutrition wise? And also switching it, put water or watered down milk and slowly water it down in the bottle and put their favorite drink in the straw cup if they actually have the skills to do it. So we want to make the bottle not as useful and the straw cup more useful. But that's really all I have.
A honey bear cup that we use when you're trying to treat straw drinking. It's a little honey bear, and you can squeeze the honey bear to make the liquid come out of the straw quicker. You can do the same thing with a juice box, like one of those little juice boxes. If you push on it a little bit, the juice comes out. I used to be really against juice drinking. But after talking to Keith Williams and hearing his podcast episode way back, and then of course we replayed it last week, he's not all about nixing the juice because he feels like kids could get vitamin C deficient, and you could get some vitamins in there, especially if it's 100% juice. But again, no grazing with it because we don't want to fill up on juice or milk throughout the day.
Yeah. Sounds good. And we already touched on how to teach drinking from a straw, which is with the honey bear cup. Yeah. And really just pairing that cup up with good liquids and making it really easy for them by using a cup where you can squeeze it in.
And so don't have the bottles or pacifiers in sight if you are weaning it. Like, hide them really good. Like, we can't have children accidentally finding pacifiers, or you're trying to do a cup, but the bottle's right on the counter. Like, just common sense. Like, if we're trying to get rid of the bottles, let's not have 10 bottles all in clear view.
Yeah, that's a good one. So we'll move on from drinking and go to, my child is eating, but they're eating non-food items. What can I do?
So eating, actually ingesting non-edibles is called pica, which is actually a very dangerous, serious medical condition. I talk about it in page 156 of my book. I also have a podcast on pica and a couple other podcasts on chewing and mouthing. And we're going to put all of those resources in the show notes for this episode too, because it's a common problem and it's a common question we get. Is kids mouthing things and then some kids actually eating things like mulch. And kids can eat stone and can eat toys, and it can be very, very serious. First of all, the stuff that they're ingesting, but if they eat, I have Jill Escher was very public about this. She's been on my podcast before, and she has 2 kids on the spectrum, including her 16-year-old daughter who doesn't usually eat inedible things. And she got very sick with like a fever, and she went to the ER, and it turned out that she actually chewed a piece of a toy and needed emergency surgery. It almost perforated her bowel and everything. So like, even for older kids, it could come, you know what I mean? Like if they're chewing on stuff, or if they sometimes ingest things, it can be very serious. So you definitely want to seek medical attention if your child is eating inedible foods. But sometimes it can be a vitamin or mineral deficiency that's leading to them having excessive chewing or even ingesting. We need to keep the environment as safe as possible. We need, as many eyes on the child as possible so that they don't go, eating things. If they are eating mulch at this certain playground because they like the way it tastes or looks or whatever, you might have to not go to that playground. You might have to go to a playground without mulch. Like we just want to protect the situation. I had a student with pica, and I visited his house. I mostly had him at school, but I visited his house, and mom had put eye hooks on the outside of the doors to keep this child from going into the doors, into the rooms, during the day and getting into things and eating things. So that wasn't a hook and eye to keep kids in the bedroom. It was hook and eye locks to keep the child from going into all the bedrooms. You can also get those twisty knobs handles that the child can't open the doors, so to the laundry room, if they could get into there and ingest something dangerous. I mean, you can ingest something dangerous everywhere you turn, because there's, anything that you ingest that's not food is actually very dangerous. For mouthing and chewing, I do think that it might be related to vitamin and mineral deficiencies more than a behavioral thing. Yet again, I have, each child is so different and we don't know. Kids can also be chewing on their shirts, chewing on their sleeves. In those situations, sometimes wearing like smaller shirts. So like if they're really big shirts, you can get the necks up, or they're wearing long sleeve baggy shirts that might be provoking the chewing more. And a lot of people would say, well, just give them a plastic chewy. I actually don't usually recommend that. Again, there might be situations where a child has, something else going on besides autism, where an occupational therapist may be working with a child. I'm not saying like chewies are the worst thing in the world, but I'm chewing on my shirt and then I get a chewy. It can become a defective man for a chewy. It's germy, especially in the COVID ages where, it really isn't that, well, it isn't sanitary at all to have a child chewing on things, wearing chewies around their neck. And it's just, I do think that we can get rid of chewies in most cases slowly without, we do not want children screaming, crying. This has to be a gradual thing. But I do think chewing, mouthing, pica for sure, all need to be addressed. So if your child is having pica, definitely assess what they're eating and seek attention, but also do all these other things. I remember talking to a pica expert when I had a pica situation. Forget who the pica expert was. And he said, well, what is the child eating? Like what foods and drinks is the child eating? So don't just think, oh, I have to deal with the pica. Also deal with the eating and the grazing and, pacifier use.
Yeah. And also, what else is the child doing all day? I mean, I've seen kids who looks like they might have pica, but really they just have no idea what to do with themselves and no one's engaging them. And why not eat this? Now I get some attention. Now someone comes and freaks out because I've now just ate a bunch of stuff. So, you have to look at that stuff too. And just like any problem behavior, once you've looked at the medical side, is figure out what times the child doesn't eat things. Oh, they don't eat things when we're doing puzzles. Oh, they only eat things when I'm cooking dinner and I'm busy. Figure out the times when they do eat stuff and change that. Like Brentley used to eat a lot of dirt. He liked dirt, and he wouldn't eat the dirt if we had a bucket and a shovel and we were doing something with the dirt. But if we were just hanging out and weren't doing anything, that's what his go-to thing to do with the dirt was. So we would just always have toys and things where we could be functional with the dirt. So it's usually a medical condition, but also look at, other things that could be going on.
Yeah. And that's a great point, Kelsey. And if you are a behavior analyst listening, do an FBA on the pica and you think it's going to be, self-stimulatory or whatever. And I found it to be attention in most cases. So Kelsey's point about keep the child busy, engaged, happy, one of my mentors used to say, a happy, engaged child is not going to have problem behaviors. And so for you parents out there and professionals that, don't have the capacity to do FBAs and everything, it's fine because let's put all these great strategies in place, have the child be happy and engaged and see not just feeding problems go away, but all problems, so tantrums going to zero and talking going up. And so it's worth it. It's not like, oh, I'll just have to deal with that. Mouthing and chewing things and pica should not be a part of autism. And nobody should say that, well, that's a part of autism. It's not. It needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And so that brings us to our last question, which is one we get asked all the time. So now my child's eating, things are going well. How do I get my child to use utensils and eat on them?
Yeah, so I do have a section in chapter 10. It's towards the end on using utensils. And as I said, the assessment does start out with the drinking assessment, but also in the 18-month list on Dr. Mark Sundberg's self-care checklist is scooping with a spoon. And then about 30 months of age, use a fork to pick up the food. And knives, I believe, are 30 to 48 months. So if your child is not doing the 18-month skills of scooping from a spoon and the drinking skills of drinking out of an open cup and eating with finger food and drinking through a straw, you shouldn't jump to utensil use because, and especially if they're super picky, like you said before, Kelsey, we can't go, okay, well, they're 3. And so they should be using utensils and that's a goal and that's on their IEP or whatever. If we don't have the 18-month skills and we have extreme picky eating and we have grazing all day and we have bottle drinking, it's just like you have to build the pyramid solid before you put the next block up, right? So Jack is in the book, and Jack was, he's in the book quite a bit. He was a client, and I didn't realize feeding was an issue, and feeding as an early intervention professional, I was the behavior person. I didn't realize that his feeding was it was fine as long as he was self-feeding finger foods. Like he would even eat string beans, I remember, and little chunks of meat. And so you're like, wow, but if you presented anything mushy or presented utensils, especially a spoon, like even a fork, if we would have just gone with fork, he probably would have stabbed the stuff, but anything mushy just freaked out, like just the sight of it. So he was very picky, and I didn't know it, and it wasn't my goal, quote unquote, to work on. So that was a problem, because he also wouldn't sit at the table, at the learning table, for 3 of my visits in a row. And like, he was very much like wanted to do what he wanted to do, and would scream if you didn't present it in the right way. So for him, it even involved corn chips. He liked corn chips. So initially we had to get lots of reinforcement, and then presented a corn chip on a spoon and fed it to him. And that was like the first utensil use of a spoon that he tolerated. And then from there, it was shaping and those sorts of things. So I would definitely not jump to utensil use unless you figure all of this out. Like if your child has any significant feeding issues, I would work on everything else first. Now, if they don't have real picky eating and it's they're fine and you're feeding them, then yes, you should work on utensils first, starting with a spoon. And you might think, well, a fork is easier. Yeah, but a spoon is more developmentally appropriate. It has to get in the base first, because there's also coordination of not dropping things off the spoon. So one of the best ways to teach spoon use and utensil use is to stand behind the child, to present really favorite foods, easy foods, mushy foods, or maybe not, maybe just corn chip or Lucky Charms dry, where they could scoop, get it, and you can stand behind them and gently help them with their arm. The reason I don't like to sit in front of them is because you want to stand behind and gently prompt as little as needed to get the movement right. Just like when you're prompting to tie shoes or you're prompting anything, it's better from behind. You'll be able to just gently see where your physical guidance might be helpful. So that's where I'd start with utensils, but I would wait until we get all of this other stuff figured out. And then utensils should be easy.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. That's exactly what I would do. If a child does like yogurt or something, obviously start with something thicker on a spoon, then soup. The easier, the better. But whatever your child likes.
And sometimes chunky foods are harder than smooth. And sometimes there's no favorite food, like mushy food. So you might have to start with something harder. But yeah, if your child is on baby food too, and I tell this story, I don't know if I've told it on the podcast, but I had this child at school. I only saw him at school, and his mom wanted to come in to meet with me. And she came in, and her husband was fighting in a war. She had 2 young kids, 6 and 8, and the 6-year-old was in the class. And I saw him eating corn chips and French fries and that sort of thing. So she wanted to meet with me, and she was all stressed and financially, and he was very disruptive in stores. And then we got to well, how does he eat? And she's like, oh, well, he'll eat fries and corn chips. And I'm like, well, what about protein and vegetables and everything? And she said, oh, well, only in the baby food. And I was just like, he's 6 and he's eating French fries and corn chips. And I was like, I didn't want to be alarmed or be like, what? He's eating baby food, So I was just like, oh, okay. How much baby food does he get? And she said 52 jars a week. And, so we don't know as teachers, as professionals in schools, the extent to where people are really struggling with feeding. So, nobody ever asked her about baby food for a 6-year-old who's chewing and swallowing food. So, if you are in a position where your child's just eating baby food or whatever, no matter what the age, start dumping it out. Make your own, and then if you start dumping it out, you can start making your own. You can start making it chunkier. You can start adding things, and you can start shifting to, okay, he can eat French fries. How about sweet potato fries? Not that they're so much better, but they're different. They've got a different color, different taste, different texture, and you can start making progress. But when in doubt, if there's something serious, definitely seek medical attention. Call your pediatrician. Go in for a sick visit, even though they're not really sick. Go in, make an appointment to discuss their nutrition and the concerns you have.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey. I'm having a lot of fun with these top 5 questions. And I think the whole classic rebroadcast is also a really good idea, and pairing these up so we can put in our latest knowings, because it's been, a few years since the Dr. Keith Williams interview. And so I really like this combination. So if you're listening out there and you like the top 5 questions, or if you have a topic, or you have questions, or you like the classic broadcast, leave us an Apple review, email us at info@marybarbera.com and let us know what we should produce more of, because Kelsey and I may love it, but if it's not resonating with you, we will change and make it better. So love having you on, Kelsey. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks. You too.